Season 1, Episode 2 of the Potomac RPG Podcast. Well, I must admit that Travis Willingham is easy to watch.
Welcome one and all to the Potomac RPG Podcast, your source for old news, tired conversation, and mediocre advice for all of your favorite tabletop role-playing games. I am your wide-eyed newbie wondering what this whole D&D thing is about, Adam.
And I'm your RPG old soul, Matt.
And I am your D&D Coursera graduate, Ben.
It is another beautiful day at Potomac RPG. Thanks for being on here, guys. It's great to have the two of you on. I mean, even though we get in our weekly gaming, it's nice to be able to kick back a little bit and, talk about the hobby that we love, particularly in these times when we can't really go out and socialize. How are you dealing with the whole quarantine thing, and are you getting enough of a fix in per week of your RPG goodness?
It's working. It's hitting that spot that actual social contact has left behind.
Yeah, I think our group's going a long way towards filling that need for us. So.
Yeah, absolutely, and we just got done with a session last night, so we're still reeling from a player death. So we'll see how that turns out next week, but that'll kind of keep our blood pumping for the next 6 days until we get to play again. All right, well, let's get right into this week's topic. Regardless of what's going on in the world, it's a great time to be someone who plays tabletop role-playing games. This is a golden age of sorts. D&D has gone mainstream, which has propelled our hobby to new heights of influence, innovation, and participation. But Matt, you've been around since the early days of the hobby. So how do things now compared to how they were back then?
Oh, way better. There's really three major differences back from when I was pre-teen teenager getting into the hobby. The first obviously is availability. I think everybody knows what topic we're talking about today is that not just D&D but RPG in general is much more readily available and easy to purchase. But there's also really been, I think, a global shift in just just how big the community is and the sort of the support you have between gamers for the hobby. And also, I think there's been on the corporate side of things a really large increase in sort of the acumen of RPG companies and their production values. Back in second edition, you had used to have the artists, for example, used to be whatever whoever they could get, whatever they could pay for, and that led to things like the second edition Invisible Stalker picture, which was just, a blank page. so nowadays, it's much more professional, and I think that adds, another level to it.
Sure. Well, Ben, how about you? You've been around a while too. How are things different now compared to back then?
Oh man, back then it was very niche, and now it's really gone to all of the mainstreams. You can't go on to the Colbert Report or I guess Late Night with Stephen Colbert without seeing D&D. Stranger Things, that lovely horror show on Netflix, I believe, has brought D&D back into the zeitgeist. It's kind of awesome, kind of offsetting. I don't know if Gary Gygax would be. No, I think he would approve of this. Looking down from above, I think this would give him the feels.
Well,
seeing so many people, so many diverse people playing the game that he created, and we've all come to love, and maybe developing some new ways of playing it. I'm sure that he never anticipated hundreds of thousands of people tuning into a live stream across the internet of a bunch of voice actors playing D&D and getting into these really heartfelt stories and personal. I mean, definitely not wargaming on Critical Role, but
Yeah. Well, that, and we managed to get through the Satanic Panic. So, there's 2 wins for Mr. Gygax right there. So, but yeah, it is interesting how much things have changed, and certainly you guys have a lot more experience than I do. But just in terms of the acceptance is just off the charts. Whereas before there was that stigma, where if you said, "Oh, I play D&D," there you could be pretty certain of what kind of response you'd get from most people. Whereas today, you very well might have many people respond back, "Oh, me too," and that's something to get used to. Something I'm certainly not used to, because I'm still in that kind of old mindset where it's like, "Oh, do I tell people that I play this or not?" But obviously, we're doing a podcast, so I'm telling plenty of people. But it is a kind of a change in mindset with how popular it is now. And along those lines, let's just get into our first question. The first question today comes from Reddit user Jim Jams, who asks, "Why specifically do you think the D&D renaissance is occurring?" Don't get me wrong, I'm D&D Beyond. Oh God, that's a horrible pun. Happy that our hobby is coming into the mainstream, but I can't put my finger on why specifically it's becoming so popular. What do you think? So, Ben, let's go to you first on this. Why do you think this has become so popular? Like, what specific aspects or influences have there been?
So I think that the biggest influence was the groundwork that 5e did for allowing a new player base to come into D&D. D&D has been around long enough that everybody knows what it is. They probably haven't. Not everyone is. Most people have not played it, but they have this idea of what D&D is, and maybe some people were D&D curious. And 5e simplified the rules set down to such a way that you can actually just say, "Hey, if you want to play, come to my group. I'll bring a pre-generated character. I'll lend you some dice. Practice your Batman voice or something, and we'll go with that." And that is all you needed to get new people going.
Yeah. Interesting. Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, so I'm gonna disagree a little bit with Ben. I mean, I think 5e is a big improvement, and I think it has drawn a lot more people since 4th edition was not was something of a miss. But I think really the increase in popularity at least correlates. It's not causation, but I think it strongly correlates with really the internet coming into itself. And as I think as the internet came to exist. I think it really kind of normalized the hobby. I mean, earlier the two of you mentioned, the stigma that existed around D&D. It's like, I play D&D, you're getting a swirly, right? I mean, that was that was sort of the the way.
How'd you know?
No comment. But the thing is that was the way things used to be. But I think as online communities developed and people saw a lot more people were into not just Dungeons and Dragons, but other role-playing games as well. I think that sort of created an acceptance of the hobby. And I think, that when you coupled that with the companies getting better, Wizards of the Coast, used to be TSR that owned it, and Wizards bought it and created, and that created 3rd edition, which was a huge rule improvement over 2nd edition. I think when you couple the internet with market, demographics research and just better business practices, I think you had a lot, much more stable companies. So I think when you combine that with the normalization of the hobby, you really just had a bigger base and better rule sets. And I think that normalization of the hobby kind of corresponds with other hobbies that fall into sort of the same, it's an overlapping Venn diagram. For example, anime and manga. Not everyone who's into RPGs is into anime and manga, but there is definitely a lot of overlap. And I would say that the popularity of that, at least in the US, tracked very well with the rise of role playing games. And I really think the internet was sort of the ultimate driving force behind that.
Well, you bring up a good point in terms of those overlaps, and for you, it might have been anime. I was thinking in terms of my own experience with tabletop board games, because I had gotten into that, and just being involved in that sit down around the table and play a game almost prompted me or got me comfortable with meeting new people in that kind of venue and doing that kind of thing, which then extended into D&D when I was like, well, I'm already sitting down and playing board games with people. Let me see if I can find a group out there to sit down and play D&D, since I rarely got the chance to in my lifetime. And lo and behold, here we are. So definitely agree with you on those overlaps. And then, in terms of the internet, not just in terms of those communities, but also the ability to play online has been huge with things like Roll20 and Discord. Just that ability to communicate and play games without having to go somewhere, I think, has been a pretty huge boon to the hobby in terms of bringing somebody in that may have not done so previously. So I think there's so many different aspects to it. It's hard to center in on one. I think it was a perfect storm of all those. And we can't forget about celebrities, like Ben said, with Colbert, or Joe I can't say the last name. How do you say the last name? Yeah.
Hey, don't forget Vin Diesel.
Vin Diesel,
yeah.
And then the success of Critical Role and all that. So that just brought it more and more into the mainstream, made it more acceptable, and made people who might not try it before be like, hey, I'll give it a shot, see what all the fuss is about. So I don't know, Ben, like you mentioned about the rules. Do you think the rules played more of a role in that than the culture?
Oh yeah. I've always been interested in D&D. I started. My dad had like the original starter set of D&D from 1979 with the little blue cheap plastic dice.
Ooh, hold on to that.
Yeah, that is how I got started on D&D. They gave me the core rule set, me and my brother, for a Christmas one year. And then our Satanic Panic shut it down. But all through 3 and 3.5, it just seemed like there was so much weight in the D&D universe that it was impossible to just jump in. And everybody had these gaming groups that, well, we've been playing for a decade. We've got characters that are level 17. We can't just have somebody jump into our game. So, yeah, I think you kind of needed to have that huge buildup that was in 3.5 get cut back for 4E, and all the guys who had 3.5 characters that didn't want to carry through with 3.5 moved to Pathfinder, and then 5E came, and you had everybody who didn't have an existing group able to find people who were interested in this new rule set of D&D and didn't have pre-existing 5e groups, or were just trying to bring other interested people in to their new groups. That, I think, catalyzed a lot of it. It's something new. There's no networks in place that are permanently there because they've been set for the last decade. It's all fresh.
Sure, I can see that. Well, I mean, regardless of what the specific reason is, I think all of us are just happy that it happened, because we are living in an age where we are able to engage in our hobby freely and without persecution.
I have news here.
Oh. And the sound of Ralphie the News Goblin can mean only one thing. It's time for the Potomac RPG News. All right, thank you, Ralphie. So I saw this pop up last week on Reddit, posted by Dice Geeks. It's an article from comicbook.com and written by Christian Hoffer. And it talks about how Wizards of the Coast released some demographics a few weeks ago, which showed that 40% of D&D players are 25 or younger, while only 11% of players are 40 or over. Another surprising stat that I saw in there were 39% of players identify as female. So there's some really interesting demos here. Ben, what should we be taking away from these statistics?
I think that this is a pretty clear indication that the stereotypes of D&D players as old curmudgeonly neckbeards is wrong. Well, I mean, present company.
Present company excluded, yeah.
Yeah. Well, the demographics have really opened up for D&D. It's now just people who enjoy having fun with friends of theirs and are willing to get into some characters that are not themselves. Just
Matt, what are you taking away from these numbers?
Well, I mean, I think the neckbeard thing is a stereotype, especially in terms of D&D. That's really the werewolf players. But I actually no, I'm very happy to see that. I mean, I think it sort of speaks to that increase in community, and really, I think an increase in inclusivity that's come into the hobby. And I think, yeah, I mean that it's younger people who grew up with the internet. I mean, I'm of an age where we didn't have the internet and then we did. But for people that grew up with it, like I think it really opens the doors for them and lets them feel comfortable, trying different things and stepping outside of what the type of person they are in real life. And then I think that's a great thing for the hobby.
Yeah, I mean, this to me shows that we're not done growing. I mean, for the 40% to be 25 or younger, like that was pretty shocking to me. Now, I expected the numbers to be large, but not that large for 25 and younger. I expected a lot to fit in the 25 to 40 range. Kind of still got that Gen X millennial crossover group there, but 25 and younger, that means there's a whole huge generation that's going to be moving through this hobby along with whoever they bring in after that. So I don't see an end to this golden age anytime soon. Do you?
Not in the foreseeable future, unless COVID wipes out everyone.
Yes, world-ending apocalypses.
Yeah, well, that has a tendency to put a damper on the role playing. Well, another thing that I am happy to see though is 39% identifying as female. I mean, the more balanced and inclusive that our hobby can become, the better. Just because it brings in so many new perspectives and in turn new ways to play the game. I mean, there's things that just the presence of Sarah in the group changes the way that we play in a positive way. So anytime we can include not just male, female, but non-binary, racial components, which they don't have within this article, but I think that's important too. The more people that we can bring into this hobby, those are new perspectives, new ways to think about the game, which can only mean good things. So, in terms of this article, it's all good news to me. I was afraid if it was 40% or 40 and over, that wouldn't be good.
No, I mean, it's definitely a big change from when I was a kid,
Not many 40-year-olds when you were a kid playing D&D?
Well, I mean, in terms of the gender breakdown,
yeah.
I mean, it was like,
oh, yeah, for sure.
It's like a girl playing D&D.
Yeah, the days of 12-year-old boys in a basement playing D&D, I mean, I'm sure it still happens, but now it's more likely that it'll be over wine at a dinner party. So it's great to see. I'm really loving that the hobby is growing as much as it is. So that's the news for this week. We're going to step out for a moment, but stay tuned. We'll be right back after the break.
As any tabletop role player would know, coffee is an essential commodity for those 4-hour sessions we all go through. And a great place to get that coffee is foundfamiliar.com. Found Familiar is a couple of people with a passion for coffee creation and D&D, and they've teamed up with favorite artists from all around the world to bring specialty grade coffee that celebrates the creativity sparked by Dungeons & Dragons and other TTRPGs. Use the coupon code Potomac RPG, all one word, at checkout for 10% discount on your purchase. That's at foundfamiliar.com. And with that, let's get back to the show.
Welcome back. We're going to get into another question here. This one comes from Reddit user Plasman30, who asks, are there RPG popularity stats anywhere? I'm going to assume number 1 and number 2 are going to be Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder, just because you can find them in Barnes & Nobles and other retailers. But I'm curious how other games such as Savage Worlds, 13th Age, and Castles and Crusades fall on the list. So I did a bit of digging and found the OR report for the fourth quarter of 2019. That's the latest one that I was able to find. And it looks at the stats surrounding role-playing games on Roll20. Now, obviously, this isn't going to be indicative of stats for the entire industry, but I think it's a decent representation. And in terms of answering the question, Savage Worlds is doing the best of those three at 0.48% of all campaigns, while 13th Age and Castles and Crusades comes in at 0.2% and 0.01% respectively. Now compare this to D&D 5e sitting at 47.54% of all campaigns on Roll20, and you can see just how dominating it is. Matt, are you happy to see D&D sitting so strong by itself at the top?
Actually, no. So don't get me wrong. I love D&D. It's what I started with, but there's certainly a lot of other games out there that use similar or different systems. Like 13th Age, for example, is sort of a quasi D. It's a little different, but it's kind of a similar kind of thing. Savage Worlds is really a rule set. And I'm kind of surprised at those numbers. I mean, I haven't checked other sites like RPG.net or whatever, but I would have expected some of the genre setters to be maybe a bit higher. Like, the World of Darkness, wherever I've been, I've always known people that have been into, werewolf, vampire, mage, that kind of thing. And so I'm kind of surprised that's not higher. Or things like Call of Cthulhu, which defines the horror genre. I think it's kind of good when there are other systems that if other systems have a bit more popularity, because there are different ways of playing the game. They may be less gamist and more narrative, or focus on sort of different aspects of character development that Dungeons and Dragons doesn't. So I'm actually maybe a little, disappointed that the other systems aren't higher than that. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I can see that. And I mean, at least you mentioned Call of Cthulhu, that's sitting in second place at 15%. So at least one of them seems to be making a move. I mean, the next one down is Uncategorized at 14%. So that's the combination of all the others. So, at least there does seem to be one coming up. And I see Pathfinder and Pathfinder 2nd Edition moving up on this list as well. So, at least there's some movement, but boy, that's a lot of ground to make up. Ben, what are you seeing with these statistics?
Yeah, my first instinct when I see polls like this is to question the implementation of the poll and say, they're not catching what they're trying to catch here, because Roll20 is kind of focused on Pathfinder, anything that you need, like a grid-based system. So all your more narrative-based systems you're just going to use a chat.
You won't use a D20. Roll
Exactly,
20,
yeah.
it's biased right there.
That's right there. It's in the name. No, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that. That's quite a difference in perspective there. If it's geared more towards that kind of grid and dudes on a map kind of approach, I didn't even think of that skewing it.
Yeah, I know we don't use Roll20, and we actually do D&D online. So just for the viewers, listeners, we do like a Zoom right now, and a Miro.com has got just this great whiteboard that they should become our sponsor so that we can talk more about them.
And make some money off this. I mean, that's twice now we've plugged them. We got to get something back here. Can't give it away for free.
Yeah, and that works really well for us. Roll20, we've just not had. We don't need all those features, and sometimes they seem like a little bit much for our gaming group. We could do a lot of really cool things that don't need a grid-based system. Just theater of the mind.
Yeah, that's very true. Or just that whiteboard, just enough that we can get an idea of where things are. Or I mean, that whiteboard even allows us to do grid-based combat if we want, or not if we don't want to. So a little bit more flexibility there. I know we've gotten into the pros and cons of Roll20 in the past, and we're not going to dive into those here. But I get what you're saying. Roll20 is a bit of a bear, and it's a high learning curve to get things up and running, and has a lot of features that, quite frankly, we just don't need. So, yeah. Now, how did you feel about seeing D&D at the top, though?
That was not surprising to me. I think Roll20 was pretty much built for D&D and for Pathfinder. So this is their core audience, and 5e is just a huge audience. So it's not too surprising. But I think that this poll undercounts all of the home groups that are doing different things. I mean, our group, we are the RPG, Potomac RPG. We've done other systems. Adam, you DM'd a set
City
of
games
of campaign. I don't know what to call that. An adventure,
one shot,
short adventure.
Yeah. So,
several shots.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely get into multiple different systems, and I noticed some big names weren't even on the list. Like I was looking for 10 Candles on that. Now that requires nothing on Roll20. I mean, like there's nothing really you could. I mean, I suppose you could run it, but and I've heard great things about 10 Candles, and it is very popular and nowhere on the list. So I'm kind of agreeing with you there, Ben. I think it might be a little skewed on that, and some of these more narrative-based games aren't getting quite the representation that they should be.
Yeah.
So we're going to move into a little game for the both of you. We've been talking a lot about the popularity of tabletop role-playing games the last few years. Both of you have been playing for years and years, so let's put your knowledge of the hobby to the test. We're going to play a little game called Over Under.
Here we go now.
All right, welcome to Over Under, where we pit our two guests against each other in a game of perception and intuition. So here's how it'll work. I'll ask one of you a question, to which you'll give me a number as the answer. Then the other person gets to take the over or the under. We have 5 questions, so let's see who wins this thing. You guys ready?
Sure.
Ready.
All right. So I flipped a coin before this just to determine who got the first question, and Ben, you get the first question. So let me pull up the list here. So, according to the database at RPG Geek, how many tabletop role-playing games are there ever?
Ever? Oh, man.
Ever.
I'm going to go with 500.
500. And Matt, do you take the over or the under?
Wow. I am going to go with under.
You could go in with the under. Oh, the correct answer is 10,892.
Oh my god!
Oh, wow.
So that
Wow.
would be a
That
big
including
win
like
for Ben.
all
there.
languages all over the world, or Wow.
I just counted them all up. There were a ton of them.
Okay, I learned something today. Wow.
So next question. Now this goes over to you, Matt. Another one from the database at RPG Geek. How many different tabletop role-playing game podcasts have been created ever? So since we are one, we might as well ask this question.
I am going to go with, I don't know. Let's say, given that there's 10,000 games and most of them are probably devoted to particular ones, and internet's only been around for so long, I don't know. Let's say 1,000.
1,000. All right, Ben, do you take the over or the under?
Definitely, I'm going to take the over. Yeah.
The correct answer is 1,328.
Oh,
so
I was
good
pretty
close
close.
there, Ben.
I was
You were pretty close.
close.
That was good. That was good. Little closer than the first question for both of you. So that's great. All right, back over to Ben for the third question. Reddit has a pretty active community around D&D and a great source of information, is a great source of information. As
Agreed.
of May 1st of this year, how many people are subscribed to the subreddit D&D?
3
And no looking it
million.
up. 3 million?
Yep.
All right. Matt, what do you say? Over or under?
3 million? Wow. Wow. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna say almost worldwide. So I'm gonna say over.
You're saying over?
Yeah.
The actual answer is 1,726,297.
today.
Ben is running away with this. All right. Back over to Matt. As of an hour ago, because I looked it up then, how many D&D games were being streamed live on Twitch?
Wow. I am going to say 10,000.
10,000 live Twitch streams of D&D.
At the same
All
time,
right?
or within a certain interval?
No, right then at that moment, how many were streaming? Yep.
This was a Saturday?
This was as of an hour ago.
It's
Sunday.
a Sunday.
I know all the days blur together.
Well, given
So
that
you're
everyone's
saying
home,
10,000.
I'll still stay with 10,000. I have no idea.
Okay, Ben, what do you say?
So
over or under?
Twitch is not my platform, so I have very little idea. But I think it's got to be under, because I cannot imagine having that many parallel D&D games in the world. That's just so... There's just too much awesomeness in there for me to contemplate.
Well, maybe someday we'll hit that number, but as of today, or as of an hour ago, it was 232 live Twitch streams going on for D&D. So Ben, you get a fourth one correct.
I'm going to get shut out here.
Yeah, well, it comes down to this. So Ben, we go over to you for the final question. How many total pages are there in the physical copies of the 5e DM Guide, Player's Handbook, and Monster Manual combined?
I'm going to say there's about 250 each, so 750 total.
Okay. Matt, do you think that's
guess,
over or under?
It's a good guess, but I'm going to say it's a little bit over that.
The correct answer is 987. So Matt prevents the clean sweep. But Ben, you are the winner of over under. Congratulations. You don't win anything. You don't win anything at all. So. Thanks for playing, guys. All right, so let's get into our last question of the week. This week's last post comes from Reddit user Pulp Frit, who asks, introducing someone to D&D 5e. A friend of mine who has never ever played D&D nor a tabletop game told me she's interested in trying it out. Lucky for her, I have just started a Lost Mines of Phandelver. Is that right? Phandelver. Delver, that's right, campaign, and they're barely one session in. They just reached Fandalen. How do I introduce her to the mechanics and workings of pen and paper RPG as well as D&D? So far, all of my players have had at least one experience in RPG, so I don't know how to tackle this one. Thanks in advance. So, Matt, let's go over to you first. How do you introduce someone to D&D who's never played before?
Okay, well, I think that's actually, I think I can handle that pretty well, because I remember I did that a long time ago with my sister. And it's actually, I would run basically a short tutorial type adventure with them. So you basically, you have them, you can generate. Sometimes character generation is complicated, so you can hand them, a pre-made, simple Joe Fighter or something like that, and you just kind of go through it with them, and you give them, a set of encounters, and you kind of say, okay, you can do the following things. If you look on the sheet, you'll see this, kind of like, it's Clippy from old Windows. Hi, I see you're trying to hit an orc. Would you like some help? And so you just kind of run them through the basics, and kind of like in a lot of video games have kind of the little tutorial section in the start to show you how to play. And it's not a bad idea to do that with a new player, or even seasoned players on a new system. It's not a bad idea to sometimes do something like that, just to acquaint them with what the characters can do, and where on their character sheet they would find the information that they need. And once they have the basics, then you can throw them into an actual game with the other players, and maybe go a little easier on them. Like try not to kill their character in the first adventure. Yeah, yeah. So that's how I would go about doing it. Yeah.
All right. Well, Ben, what about you? How do you go about it?
No, I agree with Matt here. I think that the best way to take a new character and introduce them to D&D is a quick little tutorial session, where maybe just start off with a level 1 fighter and go through the loading screen of, well, this is how you pick up a sword and attack. This is press X. This is how you block your defense action, your dodge action. And then after all of those little mechanical things are done, go through the character creation screen, if we're going to follow the gaming kind of analogy here. What does your character look like? What do they do? Do they have an accent? What's in their tragic backstory? And just walk them through the D&D character creation process with them for the first time. It's not that hard. They're going to get it. They're going to let their creativity out a little bit, and then they're going to be ready to go talk like a Batman or whatever.
Yeah. Well, no, and I would think on the kind of list I put together, you guys hit strongly on the simplify the rules and the tutorial aspect, but another side of that is maybe meeting the player where they're at. We come from a background where the idea of humans, dwarves, and elves is every day. Like, it doesn't really, it's not a hard stretch for us to think of these things, but for some newcomers to the hobby, this fantasy world that we're building may seem a lot further out of bounds than maybe for us. So kind of meeting them where they're at, maybe having the setting a little less strange, maybe not diving into the lore quite so much, tell them what they need to know rather than the entire history of the Forgotten Realms. That'll make somebody's eyes glaze over real quick if they're not really interested in that stuff. So maybe just figuring out what they want to experience and gearing it towards that, and meeting them where they're at might be a good route to go as well. I don't know what you guys think about that in terms of how you approach a player specifically who might not be as into the fantasy setting.
Well, you can. I mean, I think you don't have. It doesn't have to be a fantasy setting, right? I mean,
exactly.
It could be. It could just as easily be a modern setting. I mean, like mentioned Call of Cthulhu earlier, right? So, like, Call of Cthulhu is early 20th century, if you're being really classic, or modern times. I mean, it's pretty much modern era. So yeah, you could throw someone, and it's just like everyday life, except with vast horrors waiting to drive you insane. But it's more relatable, and so in other settings that are modern or even near future sci-fi, might be easier for people to kind of relate to, and you don't have to necessarily make up history of the world, because it's basically our world with just a couple of twists or something like that. So.
Sure, or even kind of patterning it out after like shows that they like. How many people who watch Game of Thrones thought, oh, maybe Dungeons and Dragons might be cool to get into.
And I think there is a Game of Thrones RPG actually.
There probably is.
Yeah, I think it was Green Ronin. Right?
Yeah, I mean, but even if you're in a D&D system, you can format that in a way that's a bit more, Game of Thrones or
spaghetti western.
Yeah, whatever you want it to be. So, but it really should be catered to that new player a little bit, just so they don't get overwhelmed or just weirded out if they've never thought of elves before. It might be easier to digest a 1920s Call of Cthulhu than it would be a high elf.
Mm-hmm.
So. But anyway, I think that's going to do it for us this week. Remember, if you want to send in your questions or anything you find on the internet, you can send them to questions@potomacripg.com. And if you'd like to support the Potomac RPG podcast, you can visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/PotomacRPG. And lastly, you can follow us at Potomac_RPG on Twitter and at Potomac RPG, all one word, on Instagram and YouTube. Big thanks to Matt and Ben for being on the show and joining in the fun. And thank you to the rest of the Potomac RPG crew. And of course, all of our wonderful listeners out there. So for the Potomac RPG podcast, I'm Adam.
I'm Matt.
I'm Ben.
Till next time, keep those dice rolling, keep those stories coming, and
never stop playing.
You missed it again.
Yes. Oh, Tom is Ralphie.
Yeah,
okay.
Tom is Ralphie.
We did not know that.
That's amazing. I had no idea that it was Tom.